Good afternoon to all. So, dato che la conferenza è in inglese, dirò prima io qualche parola in italiano. I'm so sorry, I speak for the students before in Italian, because I studied English in a very bad school. I'm very come si può dire, preoccupato. Gli effetti, buoni. Allora, intanto grazie, molte grazie anche a Caterina Padoa Schioppa per aver organizzato questo incontro. E si tratta di un incontro interessante, molto speciale per la nostra facoltà, per gli impegni che la facoltà ha assunto sul piano accademico di collaborazione con la Cina da molto tempo. Noi abbiamo un agreement che è esteso a diverse realtà delle accademiche cinesi che è in qualche modo rafforzato da legami che vanno al di là diciamo di una collaborazione formale, ma entrano anche nel merito di rapporti e di sperimentazioni articolate attraverso workshop, lecture, scambi anche culturali importanti. Recentemente, qualche mese fa, abbiamo fatto un grande convegno dove sono intervenuti i nostri colleghi della Cina, in particolare diciamo dell'Università di Dong Gong, che hanno fatto in qualche modo capire quali sono gli interessi che abbiamo in comune oggi sui grandi temi dell'architettura, soprattutto quello che investe il destino, possiamo chiamarlo così, delle grandi metropoli nella prospettiva e nei problemi che il mondo globalizzato ci pone di fronte, che non sono certo comprimibili in parole semplici, perché sono problemi molto complessi. Dirò due cose che hanno a che fare con questa enorme questione che noi abbiamo di fronte. Allora, da un lato noi abbiamo il problema del tempo, perché il tempo è una categoria che con i processi della globalizzazione, soprattutto con i processi della digitalizzazione del mondo, è diventato un elemento molto difficile da lavorare, da comprendere, con cui fare i conti, perché non abbiamo più tempo, ma abbiamo più tempi compresenti, che naturalmente estendono e dilatano il registro delle interconnessioni e quindi anche dello scambio, e quindi da un certo punto di vista è un tempo, sono dei tempi che favoriscono aperture e contaminazioni che sono nel qui e ora, che sono nell'attimo, nell'istantaneità. Questa è la prima questione. Dall'altra parte abbiamo il problema dello spazio, che è uno spazio che invece, contrariamente al tempo, si restringe, si contrae, al punto da far capire al mondo che c'è bisogno di mettere riparo a questo restringimento dello spazio, che non basta alzare muri, chiudere dei cancelli, proteggersi, stare dentro gli spazi stretti per sentirsi più al sicuro. Quindi questa è la problema contemporanea che abbiamo di fronte, con la quale l'architettura deve lavorare molto seriamente se vuole trovare una via di uscita e una prospettiva per la metropoli. Tanto sono contento che questo studio Vector Architects e Dong Gong in particolare, che qui alla mia destra introdurrà attraverso i loro lavori. contento perché si tratta di una Cina diversa da quella che noi conosciamo. Basta scorrere anche non in maniera approfondita, ma i loro progetti. Io non ho avuto modo di studiarli, devo confessarlo approfonditamente, però li conosco da un po' di tempo anche, per capire che ci troviamo di fronte a una generazione di architetti molto molto interessante, perché lavora su un doppio registro di cui vorrei sottolineare in qualche modo la qualità. Da un lato, diciamo, lavora su un'idea che tende a togliere la maschera occidentale al registro compositivo e anche alla progettazione che noi vediamo nelle facciate delle grandi metropoli, soprattutto nei downtown, così come si presentano in tutto l'universo e la costellazione infinita delle grandi metropoli europee, ma anche transoceaniche. Sono appena stato recentemente a Tokyo e vi posso confermare che tutto questo è presente anche nel delicatissimo sistema diciamo giapponese. Questo lavoro che tende a graffiare, quindi a togliere una parte di questa maschera occidentalizzante che ricopre in maniera pervasiva le scritture che hanno una loro identità, una forte storia, è parte di questo loro lavoro. L'altra parte di questo lavoro che è molto interessante è che loro lavorano proprio per il primo motivo di cui dicevo, all'interno di una scala che prevede anche un registro e una partitura su una dimensione che non è necessariamente quella grande e che abbraccia per questo anche qualcuno che è presente in questa sala, mi pare che ha scritto un libro che si chiama Piccolo e Bello, una moglie particolare, che abbraccia, diciamo, all'interno di questa dimensione un'altra delle categorie importanti per l'architettura sulla quale noi dobbiamo riflettere, cioè come si può scrivere anche un paesaggio o si può sovrascrivere all'interno di un ambiente che ha come obiettivo il far permanere il respiro della terra con piccoli interventi mirati, dare un segnale forte, importante, potente, altrettanto potente di quella che è per molti riconosciuta l'architettura dopata che si serve delle sue energie linguistiche globalizzate per poter affermare la esistenza di un oggetto nello spazio con tutto il suo rigore e tutta la sua potenza. Questo mi sembra una lezione importantissima che tra l'altro abbraccia in maniera trasversale le discipline del progetto che sono presenti all'interno del nostro dipartimento e che diciamo dà anche a noi la possibilità di gettare uno sguardo dentro una prospettiva alternativa rispetto alla Cina che noi conosciamo, quella che i giornali patinanti presentano come architettura contemporanea alla ricerca diciamo di una sua identità nella contemporaneità. Non è vero, perché l'identità ce l'ha e la presenta in maniera forte e consistente attraverso questo lavoro. Quindi sono molto contento, sono sicuro che la cosa mi interesserà, sono contento che questo avvenimento avvenga all'interno del laboratorio del portale ArchiDiAP che lo ha promosso. Poi ringrazio Manuela Raitano anche per aver fatto il coordinamento di questa redazione che si avvia al nuovo ciclo di conferenze internazionali sul tema dell'architettura. Sono giovani, sono bravi, sono sensibili, sono diciamo avvezzi a questo confronto e credo che questo incontro di oggi sia un incontro che mette in piedi una relazione più approfondita negli scambi internazionali, che non si limita solo ai grandi nomi, alle culture patinate, vuol dire che stiamo andando a fondo nei problemi e che quindi stiamo cercando anche in quegli spazi dove architetti apprezzati sicuramente sono più nascosti rispetto ad altri, per cercare di far emergere questa qualità che da un piano, diciamo, di retrospettiva avanza verso di noi e che quindi ci impone anche di guardarla con maggiore attenzione. Approfondire questi rapporti significa entrare anche nel merito di quelli che sono gli strumenti, i metodi che una nuova generazione di architetti sta mettendo in piedi per dare inizio a una nuova scala di valori, intenderei dire, sia dal punto di vista civile che dal punto di vista urbano. Quindi grazie Caterina, grazie a Manuela e grazie soprattutto a Dong Gong per questa sua presenza e enjoy. Grazie mille.
Cercherò di essere brevissima. Innanzitutto voglio dire una cosa, per questa giornata mi apre il cuore, perché in quest'aula, non so se in molti casi penso si tratti delle stesse persone, ma in quest'aula siamo stati riuniti stamattina per ascoltare le parole di Walter Veltroni, oggi ci ritroviamo dopo poche ore ad ascoltare Dong Gong, quindi sono quelle giornate in cui devo dire, avvengono delle cose che mi fanno sentire felice del lavoro che faccio e spero anche che facciano sentire soddisfatti gli studenti che partecipano a questi eventi, delle opportunità che noi cerchiamo di dargli. Vi ringrazio per essere venuti, ringrazio soprattutto gli studenti che credo forse siano cinesi, credo parecchi studenti che probabilmente vengono dal paese dello ospite che stanno partecipando a questo pomeriggio che, come sapete, è organizzato dalla redazione di ArchiDiAP. Faccio una precisazione appunto per gli studenti perché non tutti lo conosceranno. ArchiDiAP nasce da un'idea, nasce ben prima di me, nasce da un'idea di Orazio Carpenzano e di Fabio Balducci ed è stato diretto prima di me da Donatella Scatena, che è qui presente e che ringrazio per il punto in cui l'ha portato fino ad oggi. Nasce con lo scopo di condividere l'architettura in un senso molto ampio e quindi attraverso un sistema, una piattaforma web che io penso che molti di voi abbiano già navigato, che permette di caricare in maniera autonoma le opere, quindi si rivolge soprattutto a voi studenti affinché appunto implementiate la quantità di materiali che sono su questa piattaforma, ma anche per esempio gli studi di architettura che potrebbero decidere di caricare proprio i loro lavori. Stiamo lavorando attualmente in lavorazione a una sezione di questo sito che si rivolgerà invece direttamente ai dipartimenti di architettura, con l'intenzione di permettere uno spazio di caricamento autonomo anche ai prodotti delle ricerche progettuali, per fare in modo che la presenza del progetto in rete riesca a diventare sensibilmente più numerosa e quindi a competere con la grande presenza invece di opere che sono effettivamente molto presenti nei database di architettura. Ora, accanto a questa funzione quindi di divulgazione via web, ArchiDiAP però si è posto dall'inizio la missione anche di organizzare eventi, di organizzare conferenze con ospiti internazionali, e a partire da questo proposito abbiamo deciso con Caterina Padoa Schioppa e con Federica Moggia, che si occupano della sezione degli eventi, abbiamo deciso di alternarli anche ad ospiti nazionali proprio per definire un bilanciamento nella speranza, diciamo così, di animare un confronto, un dibattito che ponga la nostra architettura su un piano di relazione e confronto con realtà fuori del nostro paese. Siamo onorati, molto onorati, poi due parole me le fate dire in inglese, alla fine tanto sto finendo, ma siamo onorati di ospitare Dong Gong, che è partner dello studio Raitano Architects, poiché a mio avviso effettivamente quando Caterina ce l'ha proposto io sono stata molto contenta, perché la trovo una delle realtà internazionali più stimolanti. Anche io ho un accordo di collaborazione, collaborazione internazionale con la Cina e devo dire che spesso da questi nostri viaggi si torna con delle impressioni un po' parziali, no, di queste, mentre invece ci sono delle realtà che sperimentano su dei piani che sono tutto sommato ancora anche molto vicini a quelli che sono i piani interpretativi dell'architettura europea e italiana in particolar modo. Loro lavorano moltissimo su un'interpretazione della modernità che cerca di passare per alcuni elementi rivisitati delle tradizioni costruttive locali, dello spirito del luogo, quindi tutti i temi che noi come italiani chiaramente abbiamo masticato e continuiamo a masticare nel nostro lavoro. Si tratta di un cambio, secondo me, di paradigma nell'architettura cinese contemporanea che ha ben definito lui stesso in una intervista, in una recente intervista in cui ha detto che l'architettura è un medium, nel senso che è solamente il mezzo che noi usiamo per rivelare l'energia dei luoghi. E un'interpretazione quasi io la definisco quasi lirica, che chiaramente, come immaginate, è molto in sintonia con molti dei lavori interpretativi che facciamo noi italiani, soprattutto in una scuola come quella di Roma. Passerei a questo punto la parola a Caterina, che invece farà un'introduzione, penso già in inglese, non alternerà l'inglese e l'italiano, non so, comunque farà un'introduzione del suo lavoro. Permettetemi soltanto un brevissimo ringraziamento nella sua lingua, ma aiuto anche con quello che ho scritto. I just made a very brief presentation in Italian concerning the website of ArchiDiAP, but mostly concerning the reasons why we wanted to invite you here today. Which was due because of the particular way typical of editors work of interpreting the energy of places, as yourself said in an interview, as if architecture could be just a medium to reveal the spirit of places. So I don't want to steal any more time. I invite to speak Caterina Padoa Schioppa, that will make a brief introduction of your work. But let me please, before, to thank you on behalf of the whole ArchiDiAP editorial staff for having accepted our invitation and for being here today with us.
Io parlerò in inglese per mediare questo passaggio dal nostro ospite, anche perché forse c'è qualcuno che non parla italiano. Many things have been already said, so I will try to be very short. Dong Gong is the founder of Vector Architects. He founded the firm in Beijing in 2008. And 2008 is a very important date for China. It's the date in which the Olympic Games take place. The Olympic Games, which are the most spectacular Olympic Games of the modern history and modern era. And I think this was a moment, a turning point for China, for the People's Republic of China. It is on the one hand the end of that political and cultural season, which was entirely dedicated to the transition to the so-called socialist material civilization that started in the 1970s. In which the Chinese cities in particular, but in general the Chinese territory undergone under a sudden metamorphosis that cost very much in environmental and social terms. And not only during these 10 years and more, China became a sort of laboratory, an international laboratory of design, so all the international architects were doing projects, spectacular architecture, and also Italian architects, among them dello, Piano, Fuchs as well, just to quote the most important one, but also young architects that have chosen to place their and found their office in Shanghai or Beijing, for example, to Tokai Studios, or also some kind of more academic exercises, such as the exercise and the abstract proposal that came with the 2010 Shanghai Expo, in which academic designers such as Gurini, Anselmi, Zermani, Monistiroli, and others were involved. But the Olympic Games in 2008 also marks the beginning of what we can call a sort of redemption, season of redemption of the Chinese architecture. that was triggered by the very idea to abandon the approach based on tabula rasa, in which all the legacy and the ordinary heritage have been demolished, and also the traditional, the folk and the peasant culture, which most of the Chinese culture and Chinese people today urbanized probably are originally from. A renaissance that was made from a young generation to which Dong Gong definitely belongs, that had also the opportunity to study and to make part of their education abroad. Dong Gong was in the United States, in Boston, and in Illinois, and he's also awarded by as a distinguished Dean professor. A generation that tried to revive the cultural and symbolic roots in millennial doctrines, between them, of course, also, I guess, the Feng Shui, which you all know, but also craft knowledge, building techniques that were ruined with the advent of modernity. So a generation that had shifted the interest from the big scale spectacular architecture, as already our director said, to a more small and medium and small size architecture, and to peripheral contexts such as the small cities. To say, of course, small in China is always, I think, very different from what we call small, but also to rural villages, to the new touristic places and destinations. So in general, to what we call the territories of marginalities. And also the systematic recovery of the historical legacy, heritage, both tangible and intangible. I guess you will show us your intangible cultural heritage museum, which is one of your early career projects. So the paradoxical risk, of course, in China, as everywhere, is that in the moment in which we try to save this heritage, we also contribute to the commodification, to the museification, and also perhaps the mystification. So we might be discussing that. Dong Gong is, in this sense, a very exemplary architect of his generation, in the commitment to the Chinese historical legacy, and also to the adaptive reviews of many examples of modern heritage, such as industrial compounds, homes in the ancient Matrix cities, etc. There is for sure a strong bond to the past, and there is this very idea of the learning from it. His architecture is a very interesting reinterpretation of traditional typologies such as temple, courtyard houses, and in general additive structure. But coming to a very interesting also reinterpretation and reinvention of new typologies, which we call hybrid typologies. What is very interesting is the way he established time to time a very measured dialogue to the context through strategies that can be very different. In some cases, he reacts with pure forms and seminatic architecture, but sometimes also with organic forms that are unfolding into the landscapes. And this, I think, is fulfilling in the way he doesn't start with a stylistic ideology, but he has rather an approach based on honest and very experimentation, formal experimentation. So I will conclude saying that Dong Gong architecture embodies a sort of classicism. The space seems to be generated by hidden numeric principles determined by anthropometric order, and he Dong Gong reaches really an aesthetic parsimony, which is a sort of nakedness with both structural and symbolic meanings, but also to a great poetic intensity. So thank you very much to be here, and I just let you go.
Thank you for the introductions, all of you. Even though the Italian part I don't understand. That sounds nice.
It's a great pleasure to be invited to greet you here today. It's a little bit warm. All right, so yeah, I think as you, all of you may know that China right now, it's in a very specific time. I believe in the modern history or contemporary history. It's a very unique transition, and I believe it might pass very soon. In the past 2 decades, I think we have encountered some very serious issues. Of course, when the nation is rising, a lot of problems will come along. And my topic today actually is regarding a very specific issue, but it's very critical in China right now. It's about the topic's new into old. I don't know how much you know about China, but in the very beginning of my lecture, I will give you a sense about, during this process of urbanization, what we have been experiencing for the past 2 or 3 decades. This is some pictures showing what's happening now in China. But I have to say, today the situation has been a little bit different already, because the consciousness of the society start to be critical about, we demolish a lot of old buildings, the trees of our life, and also the city. So is that the way we try to build up our living environment? And that's a very serious question. But the picture showing my PPT, the first couple of pages, showing that for example, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this is a typical situation in the Chinese city. As you can see that this old district has been just demolished right away, and then this new gigantic modern buildings as a replacement. So change the entire city structure and also the urban context. This is also a similar condition. But just replace this gigantic buildings with this anomalous, we call this like a European style because sometimes we have an arch here. That's the situation. And even the building is like a huge wall to block the entire city. So I'm a Beijing people. I was born in Beijing. This diagram showing you that the expansion of Beijing. This is the city back to 1950. And this is the same scale. And to 2000, the city already become like this size. It's the same scale. So you can imagine that how fast the city has been expanding. But this picture is even more interesting. This is the old map right after the liberation of China. So this is the capital of Beijing, the yellow part. And this is today's Beijing. And these are in the same scale. So, in the old Beijing, we have the famous city wall. Is this boundary here. But now the city wall has vanished because we demolished it. And we actually changed the city wall to, we call this the second ring of Beijing, which is a very important expressway. But now we already have the 6th ring, and we're building the 7th ring. So just give you a sense. And this picture, actually, the first project I'm going to explain in my lecture is right here. This is a particular location in Beijing, to the west of the city. In the 1950s, when you look to the west, it's just the suburb. It's just a vast landscape. But today, it's actually the same location, but when you look to the west, it's already full of buildings. It's actually a new city expanding. So, and this diagram showing that this is the city wall, the boundary of the city wall. And before, in the old time, inside the city wall is the continuous, complete urban texture made by temple, by Forbidden City, and by the courtyard texture. It's a continuous, beautiful urban fabric. But now, only 25 pieces is preserved. All the rest area has already been modernized by this totally different characteristic of architecture and urban situation. So that's the picture I give you. I think it's about, in the recent 5 years, or even a little shorter time, for example, 3 years maybe, more and more people start realizing we have encountered a very serious issue. We sort of lose the character and the essence of the city we grew up and we're familiar with. So during such a transitional time, I think it's a great challenge for architects because we have to always make our own judgment based on each different project. We have to be, thinking enough about is this the right thing we do or not. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 major projects during our recent practice. It's all about dealing the relationship with new and old. The very first one is actually inside the Beijing Old District. We call this courtyard fabric. So the right spot is Beijing. So China is such a huge country. My personal feeling as an architect is that even though we are Chinese architects, and then we practice in China, but if you go to a different city to design different architecture at different places, sometimes you face totally different culture, different climate, different people, different lifestyle. But that's part of the interesting thing of architecture, because you always have a specific condition and unique enough to challenge you or to develop your own concept, engaging with the surrounding condition. So this is the location of Beijing. It's to the very north of China. And in the history, it's a war zone because you see the mountain. It's just against the city. It's actually also a protection from the Mongolia. And this is a bird's eye view of Beijing. And our project is right here. And that's actually the old city wall, the location of the city wall. But now it's the expressway. And this is the Forbidden City. This is very well preserved. Yeah. Luckily. And you already see this picture. So it's an old district, and this is a very interesting building because right after the liberation, which is about 1949, Chairman Mao asked many experts from different fields to come into the city to build new China, because Beijing is the capital of China. So during that years, there are many people from outside Beijing and actually moved to Beijing. They need somewhere to live. So this we call this building like a socialist building. It's a big apartment with kindergarten, with kitchens, dining rooms. It's very much like Corbu's Marcel apartment. It's a very utopian type, and juxtaposed with this old urban fabric. So it looks very surreal. And our site is actually right located in this neighborhood. This is a map. It's from 300 years ago, from the Qianlong, who is a very famous emperor during the Qing dynasty. And this map basically describes the urban fabric back to 300 years ago, which is old Beijing. And you can see that's the city wall. And that's the gate for the military purpose. And it's very clear structure. You have the main street, small alley, and connect for this numerous courtyard. Courtyard is the typical living unit for one family for old Beijing. And for me, that's almost like the dream place to live, because you have your rooms surrounding exterior space, so you have your own piece of sky, and you have your own piece of earth. And normally you will have trees, vegetations inside the courtyard. So it's really about artificial and nature. I think that's a very harmony relationship between the humankind and nature. But as I explained, because right after the liberation, there were many people coming into the city, the population started growing drastically. So the light gray, it's a little bit not that clear. Basically, the light gray is the original texture of the city, but this black blocks is actually the addition spaces inside the courtyard. We call this the cluster courtyard, because before, one courtyard is only for one family. So it's a perfect relationship between the publicity and the privacy. But now, we don't have that condition anymore, because each yard, most of the courtyard in this bypass district, which is the name of the district, has to be shared by 5 or 6 families. So it changed the living condition in a very bad way, actually. So this is a diagram showing the original texture of the courtyard district. And you see the density has changed after the recent 20 or 30 years of this additional space built inside the yards. And then it's actually the local residents built such spaces by themselves, without any permission, because this is their daily living space. They don't need that permission to build this kind of stuff. So this picture showing you the original quality of the courtyard. So you can imagine that all your family members is actually living around the yard, and you have a piece of very quiet, tranquil space in an urban setting, and then you have your own vegetation. But this is actually the current condition for a lot of courtyards housing. So the additional space I was talking about is all these structures inside the yard. There are small kitchens or small bedrooms, because they don't have enough space to live. It's just very natural phenomenon, actually, inside the district. So before you enter yards, you have your piece of space, but now it becomes a very narrow alley. So totally you lose a kind of privacy when you live inside a courtyard. And 70 or 80 of the courtyards has been transformed to this condition in Beijing. So our design task is actually, this is the original courtyard, but this is the cluster courtyard. What we're trying to do is, we have to face this condition. This courtyard we're working with is actually belonging to the government. It's a dormitory shared by 5 families. And the government was able to give them other places to live around this neighborhood, and they want to empty this courtyard and transform this courtyard to some public space to energize the local neighborhood, to create some public social life. And so that's the design program. And in the very beginning, we have been through a series of design comparisons, just try to find the appropriate design solutions by all these sketch and models. And this is very close to the eventual layout. So it's a very small courtyard, actually, only 200 square meters, together the yard and the interior space. But inside the courtyard, there's a series of functions. That's the reason why we call this a courtyard hybrid. It's a mix of functions. We have to leave these two corners for the future rental space, for the workers, for some professionals working around the neighborhood. So it's the leasing space. But because we're trying to create some public space for the neighborhood, we leave the central room for a public coffee and lunch. And this part is still outside exterior space as a central yard. And to set up this privacy, we actually leave these two very small yards to separate the private space and the public space. And these two small rooms are actually the multi-function room, which will be used in a different purpose after the construction. So that's basically the structure of the space. And this is a more detailed diagram. So you can see we have two small units for living, for rental, and then two small multi-function rooms, central coffee, and they share one big yard with the two small yards, which is the private yards, actually, on the sides. But the very interesting of this location is we have a Hutong, which is a very narrow alley, public alley, on this side and on this side too. So we leave actually a passage between these two Hutong, meaning that this yard can somehow connect the circulation, urban circulation of the public. So gradually we went into this larger scale model study for the space. Basically, that's so between the traditional courtyard and the cluster courtyard, that's our layout, basically. It's a axonometric showing you that the space underneath and the structure system, which basically is the two kind of structure, because we have to rebuild this part complying to the local code, because that's the main building inside along this urban fabric. But these two parts, we can use relatively more contemporary structure type, which I will explain later. So you can see that's the model showing you the two systems of the structure. This is the traditional gable roof timber structure system. And this is by a laminated bamboo, and it's like a waffle beam structure system. So it's like a juxtaposition of the two systems, representing the old and the new. Some sketches during the design process. So that's the two major structure systems. This is traditional, and that's actually designed by us, the architects. The reason we use this new system because we have to try to build this building within a very limited time frame, and also we have to reduce the disturbing the neighborhood. So the new structure system, which is the laminated bamboo structure system, we can prefabricate it in the factory and then ship on site and assembly on site. So that will give us a lot of convenience to build this up. And the laminated bamboo is all plate. We use this copper bracket just to hold them together to be column and beams. Well, it's a sad story. During the construction drawing process, one day the client called me and said, "Dong, we changed our mind. We want to eliminate the two living units in both corners because we think it's very hard to operate later on. We don't have, because they're the government people, they don't have the professional, the resource to help them to manage those. So they said, why not we just leave this space empty as a public exhibition space, and we can collaborate with Beijing Week or Beijing Design Week or something like that to have a different kind of events, public events to take place here. Well, it's a sacrifice, but I think it's okay. So that's a big change. From the quality of the space, I think it loses a kind of relationship between the small yards and the living units behind. But, we just have to accept. But that's not the end of the story, which I will explain to you later on. So after almost like 8 months or 9 months construction, this whole building is completed. So this is, which is the traditional gable roof structure, so the tile roof. That's the old part of the courtyard. And that's our new intervention by this laminated bamboo structure system. And this is the center space of the entire courtyard. Just show you some pictures after the completion. Because the space is very small, so we think this entire building is a big furniture. Many components of the building is operable. It could be open or rotate to meet the different requirements of the use by the people. So this is some elements and the condition of the courtyard. See, the shelf is rotatable to manipulate the layout of the space. This is a small pantry. It's also a rotatable furniture. That's the passage I mentioned, and connect this courtyard to both sides, to both corners of the Huchong. This is the main entrance of the courtyard. It's also a sliding door, and also the door could be operate like this. The centerpiece of the yard. And to create a kind of privacy, we actually use the material of glass block, which is a translucent material, to separate some space between some individual space and public space. So this component here is made by this glass block system. It's customized, actually. We work with a local, very small factory to customize this material. And this is the twilight condition. So in one of the directions, the space is very transparent. You see layers of space evolving in front of you. But in a particular direction, the glass block is translucent to create a certain privacy of the space. Yeah, that's basically the overall urban texture and with our design in the middle. So after the completion of the yard, the client called me again and said, we are very sorry, Dong, because we rent this entire yard out. So it's no longer a public space. We signed a 5-year lease with a private agency, which is a children educational agency. So in the very beginning, this whole space is supposed to be designed for a public space for the neighborhood. But as a result, it's becoming a private, very expensive rental space. This is, for me, it's a sad story for architect, but it's actually quite normal in China because the client always changes their mind. But fortunately, it's 5-year lease. So I hope that after 5 years, maybe the space could be reopened to the public. They actually set up only one exhibition after the entire completion. That's the condition when the exhibition is holding inside the space. And they work with the Beijing design wing, actually. So that's the first project. The second project is in a very different location. It's to the very south of China, which is in Fujian province. And it's a renovation of Captain's house. The house is located in a very remote village. It's a fishing village, actually. As you can see in the map, this red spot is the location of the space. So remember that Beijing is over here. So which one is to the very north of China, and this one is to the very south. And this is Taiwan. So this village is the closest land for the mainland China in relationship with Taiwan, geographically. And that's a closer view of the map of the whole village. So it's in a peninsula, and the right spot is the location of their house. It's the captain's house. And that's the Taiwan direction. But very interestingly, as you can see in the map, this house is located in the narrowest neck of the whole land. So this actually gives us a very interesting condition when we work on the design project. And this is the port of the village. And this is open ocean. Because every summer, the hurricane will come from this direction. So no boat could be parked within this area. So this is a safer zone for the village. But this direction has a fantastic landscape view, which I will show you later. And that's the village, actually. That's the entire village, and this is the captain's house before the renovation. A very normal local house. Well, apparently this entire village is not as beautiful as you always see in magazines. You know, when you see this Chinese village, it's always flowers, trees, with these black tiles and white walls. This is in a more chaotic condition. But I went there for many times. For some reason, I like the village because the fishing industry in China is profitable. That makes the entire village vivid. They have old people, middle-aged people, young people, and kids. If you go some of the area in China, especially in the center of China, the old village to lose young people because young people will go to the metropolitan city for making more money. But this village is you see a more complete generation, so which is more life for me, even though it looks kind of chaotic. And this is the existing condition before the renovation. The captain house looked like. It's a 2-story building, And on the right side is the interior condition of their house, and that's the daughter of the captain on the right, up right corner, sitting in the couch. So you can see, you have a little sense about the condition of the aesthetic of the local villagers. And besides that, they have two kinds of very serious problems. One is the structural safety, because the house is located along the coast. So the salt in the air actually erode the concrete structure. So you can see the cracking of the columns, which is kind of serious. And then the water leaking causes a lot of interior problems too. So the stair is damaged, the wall is damaged. And that's the condition we have to face it. We have to repair this. And besides that, in addition to this, the captain wants to build the third floor because the local climate is very comfortable in the summer. Every summer they have friends, relatives to come into their house to take some vacation. So they want some additional space on the third floor. So that's the design program we're facing. See, that's the house right here. So it's a dramatic setting right on the cliff. And this picture is showing you the two directions I was talking about. This is the direction to the port, and that's the direction to the Taiwan Sea. It's the open ocean view. And the picture was taken on top of their existing structure, on top of the second floor. And this actually gives us a lot of clues about how we initiate our design progress. That's the first time I went to the site. That's in the middle is the captain. And this is our structure engineer. He is kind of sad. he always complained, you know, I gave him a hard time all the time. Anyway, so the eventual solution of design is actually very simple. We add a barrel vault roof on top of their current existing two-story structure. That's, of course, we have been through a series of design studies, but that's the final solution that we come up with. There are many reasons for that. First of all, this barrel vault structure has an inherent directional quality. So this is actually a small side plan. It's my sketch. So you see that's the shape of the peninsula, that's the port, and that's the open ocean. So this barrel vault is actually perpendicular to this two direction, which could be like a linkage, especially on their third floor, which is originally their rooftop. And second of all, this shape, because of the curve, so no water will rest on top of the roof. The water will run off quickly. So this will give us some a protection from the water leaking later on. Of course, we have contemporary technique to protect the water. And also, this barrel vault itself is a type of structure. So it will come up with this load-bearing wall below and then converge naturally on the top. So you don't need to add columns and beams to support this. This is already a structure. And additionally, this entire family is religious people. They believe in Christian. So this shape or this type of space has a very subtle indication about the church. So it's, for them, in my mind, it could be like a family chapel for them. So there's a series of reasons that why we select this type of space. And the solution of the structure, because of the current structure problem, and also we have to add the new floor on the top. So the structure is a very critical issue in this design progress. Eventually, we work with the structure engineer to we make the decision that the red lines are the new layer of 12 centimeter concrete attached to the original masonry brick wall to reinforce the existing structure system and also to support the floor at the top, which is over here. And we actually leave a very narrow gap between this existing two-story structure and the new floor, which is the third floor, to indicate a relationship of this new and old. That's basically the structure solution. But because of the new intervention of the structure, we have a little freedom to relocate some of the existing rooms. See, this is their original floor plan of the first floor. That's the ocean direction. And they have the toilet right in the middle to block the view and the air and the light. So in the new design, because of the new structure, so we can relocate this supplementary program into this back wall of the house, sharing with the neighbors. That's the footprint of the neighbor's house. So open up the major direction to the ocean to introduce more light, air, and also the view. A little bit similar on the second floor. Before, there's 2 bathrooms, and we actually relocate the bathroom along with this wall to open up the major direction facade to the nature. And third floor for them is basically multifunctional. Right now they're doing karaoke in this space, and also they have a running machine here. So it's a family gym. They're not poor people, by the way, because of the captain and also the fishing industry, very good profit. So they're sort of rich people, but they're still villagers. So that's after everything, the design process, construction process, and that's the captain's house. So from this bird's eye view, you can tell that this village is quite interesting in terms of this urban evolution. You see this gable roof, they're all built about 300 years ago in Qing Dynasty. But when you see this 2-story building, like for example this one, covered by cement, or this kind of building, they're built about 20 or 30 years ago, after the liberation. But they have already a modern technology to do the flat roof with the water protection. Actually, the captain's house, it's belonging to this generation. It's very similar. And this tall building is the recent 10-year construction. These are all by developers. Even though they're small village, but they also have their own developers to make money there. So that's another angle showing the relationship of this new intervention of the captain house together with all the rest of the built structures. And in the daytime, it's more blending into the context because I guess maybe because of the selection of the material. But at nighttime, because the contemporary building technology allow us to do more transparent glass on the facade, so it's more standing out. And this is basically the new part of the captain's house, the gap separating, and then this is the original. But we actually reinforce the original structure, and also we put a layer of paint on top of the old house. But whenever we have this old brick, we make the paint as thin as possible, just to give a little bit trace about what the house was like in the old time. basically the strategy of how we deal with the facade. That's another shot from the west direction. That's from the very old alley. You can see this old housing built 300, 200 years ago, together with this new Captain House renovation. I will show you a movie. Have you talked about this? To give you a sense about how this building was constructed. It's a very short video clip. Yeah. This is also another challenge to be architect practicing in China, because sometimes you will encounter this very primitive construction technique. This building, because first of all it's in the village, and then because of the very narrow alley around the house, no big machine can approach the site. So everything is literally by hand. It's a handmade architecture. And you can see this is the truck, transport the cement, and they have to stop about 50 meters away from the building. And then the concrete will be carried by the human shoulder to the house to cast the concrete on site. They're female workers. And they use the gold gear, and it's just barrel by barrel. The cement will be carried up to the roof and then cast by a human. But in Beijing or Shanghai, in these big cities, the construction technology is already very developed. But in some remote area, we have to still work with this very primitive conditions, which I think is very interesting. It's not a bad thing. It's a very unique thing we can. And the next video is after everything is built. We have so you will have an overall feeling about the Captain House condition. This is the local village. That's the front gate. have a front yard before. This is basically from the existing. She's the daughter of the captain. A little bit nervous because she knows the camera. This is my gift. The model for the captain's house. So the first floor is basically a small lobby for guests and the dining room over here, and then a kitchen area. That's the dining room. They have open kitchen and a closed kitchen by this sliding door. It's a much better living condition than myself. That's a yard in front of the kitchen. The second floor is the space for living rooms, bedrooms, and a small study room. That's basically the second floor. That's the corner of the study room. Has a connection to the third floor, which is the concrete roof. That's the living room. That's the daughter's bedroom. This is the direction of the port. This is the third floor, which is the new space. So below is the space for the daily life, but here it's more spiritual. This is to the ocean, to the open ocean view. This is Paris. Actually, in the sunny time, you can see Taiwan very close. And actually, 30 years ago, it's still in the military village. So the entire village is tightly controlled by the military. But now it's much more relaxing. This is actually the columns support for the roof. And then in between the columns is a very narrow horizontal window and allow the light coming in. And this is to the direction of the port. This is the mezzanine level of the third floor. This is the only place that you can see the roof, the top of it. screen is a little dark. There's another very important detail in this design project, which the way we treat the window, because we add a layer of structure attaching to the original wall, meaning that we have a certain thickness, a depth of the wall. So we can play with it. We interpret each window is not only a cut opening in the middle of the wall, but it's an insertion of a small space. So some of the window is a table, some of the window is a couch, for example, or some of the window it's a desk. So this is some sketches in the design process showing you the iconic details. For example, that's the living room, so the window becomes a couch. And we have this operable pane inside the window system. Each operable pane is always opaque. It's made by the wood panel. And we try to pull this operable pane into the space so it's convenient for your arm to control. But we push this transparent glass pane to the very outside of the window system to give you, it's just try to maximize your view to the nature. So that's a detailed design for the window system. So that's when the operable is open. And that's the table for the daughter's bedroom. It's an insertion into the wall, actually. That's the third floor space, which you already saw. And this is actually definitely is a separation of the facade, but also it's also a structure member to tie the arch not to split to the outside. So it's actually a tension member of the structure. And the mezzanine level actually performs a similar structure function. It's actually hold the arch together, not to fall outside. So that's the mezzanine. Also, it's a mezzanine level floor slab. It's a little bit dark, but I guess it's okay. That's after the completion of the project. The captain and his wife treated me on karaoke. Karaoke is everything. It's hospitality to the architect. Last year, which already 2 years, I think, after the completion of the project, I received a series of pictures from the family. But for me, truly, I feel a little bit difference of their, the status, the condition of their living inside the space before the renovation and after the renovation. So I think the space has the power or has the capability to establish a kind of dignity of the regular people. See, they wear in black when they take pictures. So it's more like an architect. They're happy. All right, so this is the second project. The third one I'm going to present today is a hotel project. It's Alila is the brand of the hotel. It's from Singapore. It's the Asian brand. And the location is in Yangshuo, which is a very unique location in China because of the beautiful landscape of the local area. And again, this red spot showing you the location of this project together with the map of China. So to the very south part of China. And the capital house is here, and Beijing is here. So it's also belonging to the very south area of China. This is a closer view. This is our site. The red line is the property line of the project. And this is the famous river, Lijiang River. In China, we have the word Lijiang River is the very top water scenery in China. So Lijiang Shan Shui Jia Tian Xia is the Chinese word. So from this picture, actually, you will notice that there's a lot of mountains around the site. So it's literally a mountain water setting. That's the site here. And that's the mountain, and this is the Lijiang River. Besides this unique landscape condition, we have another very important factor in this project. Is this existing factory. This factory was a sugar mill factory, producing the sugar. And the factory was built in late 1950s. But during 1980s, Chairman Deng Xiaoping visited Lijiang, and he took a boat along the river. And in the very same day, he said, this Lijiang is beautiful landscape. We have to protect the environment. So in the very next year, all the factories along the river were shut down. And the sugar mill factory was one of them. So that's the efficiency of the government, of the system. But this is another angle showing that this is the factory, and that's the surrounding landscape. And this is an interesting picture that this is actually the military magazine of China. The sugar mill factory was on the cover. So which means it's a very important building at that time. And this is 1972, which is the year I was born. So there must be some relationship between myself and the factory. And fortunately, because of the location of the factory, it's not inside the county. It's actually in the suburb. It's about 3 kilometers away from the center of the county. So I guess nobody cared about this. The land is not as valuable as the areas around or inside the county. So the structure is not demolished. This is a very lucky thing. Until one day, our client, they drove past by the site and saw this. He described this like a cathedral-like structure. He fell in love with the very first sight. And then he bought the land. And then the whole story started. That's basically what happened before the design process. And that's the original, abundant condition, but before the renovation of the entire project. Because we have to deal with the old structure, so we find out the original construction drawings of this factory, which was done back to 30 or 40 years ago. And you can see that on the construction drawing, this is a very technical drawing, but we have a very political slogan on top of the drawing. This said, Chairman Mao said, the worker class has to lead everything. That's a very interesting ideology period of time in China. And that's another construction drawing said, we have to follow the great leader Chairman Mao to go forward. But that's the technical drawing. And I had this chance to have a lunch together with some of the people who work in this factory in their younger time. And, I feel the emotion when we talk about, the stories they work there. And one of this guy even cried when he memorized his younger time. Because back to 30 years ago in China, if your family have a member to be able to work in this kind of governmental institution is an honor. So, but you can imagine in the recent 20 or 30 years, China has transformed into a more commercial system. So they feel lost to some certain extent. But for me, this is a very important lunch because I feel this connection and the emotional attachment between this local people and that physical abundant structure. So it's a very interesting connection actually for us to start the design process. And normally when we go to the site, we'll do this kind of sketches to be familiarized with the existing site. And it's not the painting. Sometimes we started the design idea right on the site because it's the more direct, more honest feeling when you stand on site and to feel the environment and to think about the strategy of design. See, that's the sketch we did on site. And it already has a very initial feeling about how we deal with this new intervention of architecture to the old setting of landscape and together with the factory. That's a master plan. In the very early stage, it's one thing very clear in our mind is that no matter what we do, this old cluster of the factory building will still be the center part, dominating the whole site. So we try to lay out the new volumes of the hotel alongside two wings and together to make this complex. So the old part is still the dominant factor of the entire site. That's the very first stage of how we come up with the design idea. We do this design study, try to find a more appropriate solution in terms of the master plan. Some initial sketch showing the landscape and the architecture, the relationship. So basically, the new architecture is a very simple form and it's horizontal. We try to keep this geometry as simple as possible because it's coexisting with the old structure. So the old structure is still the dominating role. And also the landscape is very vertical, and the mountain around the site. So this horizontality of the new building will work together with the verticality of the natural landscape, natural mountains around. Some design study in progress models. And gradually some idea about the space start coming up. So we actually try to build a continuous pathway inside the new volume to give the possibility to the people to perceive the surrounding landscape with different height. So the path is actually always, it's like a climbing up pathway inside the new volume of the architecture. Some sketches during the process, some model study. And during the passage, we actually set up 3 public terraces along the pathway, somehow inspired by the local geographical features, this cave-like space. And because of this characteristic of the mountain, the rock is very soft. We call this a karst mountain. It's the term of geography. And when people try to cross the mountain from one side to another, normally they carve out this very narrow passage inside the mountain. So this actually gives us some inspiration when we design the new system of the pathway along the new building. And the good thing of this carving out is that we still can keep the form as simple as possible because everything is inside. So meaning that the simple geometry will work together better with the old structure of the factory. So that's basically a diagram showing a continuous pathway connecting 3 terraces along the way. That's a more detailed schematic model. So basically, the old structure is here, and that's the Lijiang River. This is a central reflecting pond. This is the new volume of the typical room, and that's the villa part. So basically, that's the whole site plan of the context. And this is the main entrance, the gate of the hotel. So the new volume is actually acting like a wall to block this garden from outside driveway. That's another angle of the model. The master plan. So that's the new volume on this side, and this is the villa part. This is the new volume too. And that's the cluster of the old factory. That's the Lijiang River. And this is the truss from the old time to carry this sugar cane from the river, transportation, the boat, for example, and then to the factory. So this is the original truss, but we transform this place into a swimming pool. And the old factory right now is the restaurant, library, coffee, bars, this kind of supplementary program for the hotel. Normally, in the early stage of the design process, this is still in the schematic phase. We already started this tectonic detail study, try to interpret the materiality in relationship with the space. So this is not the later stage of design. It's in a very early stage. We have to think about this kind of construction detail and the structure detail as well. And we will do some large scale models to test this exterior facade. The major material for this building is a combination of the concrete block, which is customized, together with a local stone, a kind of local stone. You will see some detail later on. That's a closer view of the study model, the light condition. And during the design process, this is a one-to-one scale model, but not made by concrete, of course. This is made by form. It's inside office we made by ourselves to test the scale of the transparency and opacity about this material. So this is a mock-up. And then later on, we went into the manufacture process, and then the client worked with us very closely, tried to find the right manufacturer of the material. We have been searching for almost half a year around the nation, but eventually we gave up because the price is too high because of this kind of customization. And the solution was the client opened up their own factory alongside the site. It's a very small factory, so everything is possible in China. So I think it's a very smart idea because, it's very close to the site. So no matter there's some additional needs from the construction site, they can quickly do it. And also they can change the size, and if there are some pieces broken, they can replace them quickly. So I think that, and very importantly, it's much cheaper. So that's actually in the client's factory. It's a small workshop. We do some research about the different percentage of the aggregates, and also they invent this machine because basically they have to build the mold first, and then they cast the cement inside the mold, and then they have to push the block out. And that's actually very tricky because of the shape, the geometry of the block. So they invent this very rough machine. I have some pictures later. I'll show you some detail. And that's the mold, the plastic mold here. And they start putting the cement inside the mold. And this is when they put the steel rod to give us sort of like a tension for the concrete block. And Here is a half circle wood stick. I will explain what is the function of that. And that's the machine to pull out this concrete block when it dries up. See, that's the wood stick. And then there's the process of stacking. To resist the lateral force. But we don't want to have this exposed, reinforced concrete columns along the wall. So we have to put the rebars inside the wall. But we don't want to expose the rebars. So the rebars basically will go through the wall piece by piece. So actually every piece of block, we will have rebars to reinforce them to resist the lateral force of the entire wall. Because of the stacking process, they have to stack one piece of block of concrete, other piece of block of stone. So basically it's by human hand. So when they weld the rebar, technically the rebar has to be connected to the floor above as an entire piece. But because of the stacking process, they will do piece by piece. So they weld the rebar first, and then put the wall, start stacking the blocks. And then they will weld another piece of rebar on top of it. Eventually, the rebar will connect to the top floor. So basically, the rebar is connected to the top and the bottom floor slab to the main structure to help to resist the lateral load. See, for the stone block, basically we drill a hole in the middle to allow the rebar to go through. But for the concrete block, this is a half circle. Remember that wood stick. Because of the wood stick, so on each side of the block, we'll have this half circle empty space. So together with another piece of block, the circle will allow the rebar to go through. So eventually the rebar is hidden inside the wall. But the problem is how we finish the very top piece. Because the rebar will go all the way up, has to be connected to the floor slab above. So the very top piece is very tricky issue. And we actually spent a week to, we didn't really think about this before the construction had the problem. And then we have to work together with the laborers to find out the solution. And later on, it's the laborers who solve the issue. First of all, they will leave an empty space for between the rebar and the top of the slab. They put additional piece of rock like this. And then they weld the rebar to the top of the slab. And they push up this piece of rock of the stone and sliding the concrete block. So they eventually finish this entire piece of this facade. So it will be like this eventually. So it's kind of tricky. I will show you a movie about the construction process. That's about 15 years ago. The client went to the site and take the hot air balloon, go all the way up to the sky, and then overlook the entire site. He's the boss, this guy. And that's the starting point of the whole construction, digging the pit for the basement, the foundation, so and then the piling work. and casting the concrete for the slab and the beams. We're trying to reduce the construction joint on the surface of the concrete. So we try to maximize the formwork. This is the big formwork installed to the right projection of the building. So sometimes it's the whole piece of one space. And that's the formwork. That's how they push out the concrete block. That's what we test the strength of the block. We do have a structural engineer, but we're trying to make sure. That's the topping of the structural system. And that's the site. That's the landscape. That's the stacking process. That's myself and the interior designer. And we have a fence around the compound. So this is basically from the local stone wall technique. On the other side of the fence is a slope of grass. That's the waterproofing of the basement. This is when they make some mistake, they have to knock it off. We have bamboo installation because there's a lot of bamboo in the local area. This is when they install the bamboo stick. That's the interior designer and myself. We designed the location of trees on the construction site. We don't have a landscape designer in this project. Basically between the two of us. And in the middle of the reflecting pond, we have a cutting walkway. Later on, you will see it. That's our site architect. He stayed here for 3 years. And his wife is in Beijing. So it's a very big sacrifice. That's when they plant the bamboos close to the finish of the entire project. This is July 1st of 2017, which is about 2 years ago. The ceremony of local tradition of this firecrackers. In the very next day, this is the July 2nd of the same year, we encounter the largest flood of the local area during the recent 50 years. So the Lijiang River rise 10 meters in one night. And the basement of the hotel was flooded. So they have to repair all the mechanical machines. See? The road is becoming a river. That's the front road of the hotel. 10 meters, the river.
10 meters.
10 meters.
In one night.
One night, because there's some reservoir on the upper part of Lijiang. And this is after everything is done. So the hotel reopened in the end of October in the same year. So which is about 3 months later, they reopened. I will show you another video about the finishing condition of the hotel. That's the bamboo installation on top of the terrace. And the ivy will climb up. Right now you already have some ivies, so it's the vegetation together with the installation. That's the central reflecting hall. And that's the old factory. It's really like a cathedral or a castle of the whole atmosphere. And that's the villa part. So in the middle of the pond, we have a cut-in walkway. It's a kind of similar logic to the curved-in walkway along the main volume of the building. So it's a similar design vocabulary. But this one is horizontal, that one is vertical. That's the old brick. Part of the reason why we use the concrete block and together with the stone is trying to keep a certain subtle consistency between this new material and the old brick wall. So beautiful landscape as well. Hallway to connect the front lobby with the typical room lobby. So it's a sheltered walkway. So on this side is a drop-off area, and this side is a walkway to the room. And that's the path carved into the volume. So it's like you're going through a mountain. That's our design intention. That's one of the public terrace. So this is the functional corridor system. That's the carved-in walkway system. So it's the two systems parallel to each other. One is function, one is functionless. The balcony are facing to the mountain, while the corridor actually facing to the driveway. That's the corridor connecting to the rooms. And for most of the rooms, you have to cross a bridge before you enter the room. And this open space actually go all the way up to the roof, and then we have skylight on top of the roof to introduce the natural light into the corridor. That's the central pond. There's a sunken plaza here, connected by the park walkway. And that's the class, which now it's a swimming pool, which is the best location to look into the distance, the layers of mountains across the river. And this is when you, on top of the river, looking back, the compound. That's the swimming pool. This is the old structure, the brick wall. That's the sunken plaza. This is the old, the new structure. This is taken across the road. There is a village, so it's looked into the building from a village. And that's the twilight time, where the light comes from inside of this translucency of the facade. I still have some pictures, but I think it's most of the information is already shown in the video clip, so I don't think I need to spend too much time for the pictures. But at the very last, that's the last one. We can stop here. We actually work with a very good lighting designer from Australia, very professional. So eventually, as an architect, I quite like the quality of the artificial light as well. All right, I think that's all for my presentation today. Thank you for the.
Great day and great lecture. I just want to ask some people from the audience if there are questions. I think that the lecture was very rich, but se ci sono domande da fare anche in italiano, naturalmente che sono tradute e incoraggerei, diciamo, i giovani a venire in seconda lettura. Sapevo che fatto. In piedi forse venire qui?
No, maybe I can. First of all, I would like to thank you because for me it has been astonishing, and it's really difficult to find in the contemporary panorama of architecture such a care of the detail and the elegance in the form. About the detail, the question is very direct. I would like to ask you which kind of book you use in the Captain House, in particular the book you use for the windows.
Yes. Okay. You finish your question?
Yeah, promise it.
In Can you check online? It's a very special wood. It can have a certain strain and also comparatively good quality for the moisture. It's kind of have a good quality to resist the moisture. It's called.
Is it a Chinese wood or not? No.
Of course, in China we find this kind of wood,
Okay.
but I'm not sure if we have the similar wood in Western Europe or.
Allora ci si dice l'essenza del
Cherry wood?
ti deve bastare.
It's a cherry tree.
Ho visto complimenti, ma ho visto un diverso atteggiamento e apertura nel vostro rapporto, no, del manufatto, soprattutto per quanto riguarda la casa che abbiamo visto davanti all'oceano, cioè questa grande apertura, questo nuovo rapporto con il paesaggio, no, nell'edificio, nel manufatto, così come anche in questa nuovo manufatto della fabbrica. E mi chiedo se questo, oltre che un fatto formale, sia anche un nuovo atteggiamento delle nuove generazioni che stanno progettando. Si corrisponde anche a una visione teorica diversa.
Well, I think it's based on the specific conditions regarding the openness. Today, basically, the three projects, of course, the two later ones is located in the middle of the vast, beautiful nature. So this openness, apparently, we try to create this connection between the artificial space to the outside nature world. But in some of the other cases, it has to be very carefully manipulated because of, you don't normally encounter this kind of site condition for every project. And we have some urban project too. So I think this is all based on very, very specific conditions. But somehow, I think the architecture or the space is a very powerful medium to connect our human perception to the outside universe through the light, the view, the temperature, and sometimes the texture. So this kind of openness definitely is one of the means to achieve this kind of quality of the space.
I would like to ask you one thing about, in the first example you showed us, you made like a psychological, theological interpretation of an ancient kind of typical architectural scheme in Beijing in a newer and modern fashion. And in the third example you showed us, you made the work of interpretation of the Chinese culture, and so of the something like a reference from the background, from the landscape, from the earth, from the traditions of the place where you make architecture. So my question is, do you even or ever use more abstract references to traditions?
I think, well, this is a very sensitive issue now in China regarding tradition. But for me, I don't know. It's very personal. It's very personal, I have to say. I don't see tradition is necessarily limited in the Chinese tradition for myself, because my experience of study and practicing of architecture is actually a combination of very local Chinese and also the Western experience as well. I studied in States for my master's degree, and I worked there. I worked in New York for many years. So I think I am Chinese. I grew up in China. So in my blood, there must be something belonging to this culture. But my experience allowed me to open my eye to a bigger world. For example, the two examples you bring up. Of course, the very first one, the small courtyard, because of the urban surrounding, it's a very apparent typology of the traditional Chinese courtyard. But the Yangshuo project is actually after I visited the villa here in Rome. It's called ArchiDiAP. Yeah. I was so amazed by how this primitive building volume with a primitive geometry, I guess because of course, one important factor back to 2,000 years ago is because of the structure. Because the primitive geometry allowed them to build stone or arch or whatsoever. But the height of the land and also the condition of the land is always changing. So the rotation of the axis and then how the volumes meet together to create a plaza or interior space. And during this combination of architecture treatment, you always feel you're inside something, but you always connect to the outside, to the landscape or to the direction of road. So I was influenced by that villa at that moment a little bit, actually, when we do the Yangshuo project. So if you look at the master plan of the Yangshuo project, you will see a similar primitive geometry rotating, and then how they meet together is create a certain quality of the space. So for me, I don't think we need to limit ourselves. Because I'm a Chinese architect, so I have to do a very literal translation about Chinese tradition. I'm not quite interested in that. But I am Chinese architect. So there must be something, maybe beyond my explanation. Yeah, that's my feeling about the issue. But that's a very debatable issue now in China. Because when you look at, for example, the previous generation of Wangshu, for example, so it has a very powerful expression of the Chinese material, Chinese profile, architecture profile, and the way they set up the garden. But for me, I think it's just a different approach.
I'd like to ask some other things about the relationship between the including of the idea, the starting idea, in order to a new project. From your point of view, which are the main differences in terms of vision, financial investments, innovation and experimentation in order to use materials for the interaction between public and private clients? Is it possible to understand something more about it?
Well, in China, my personal experience that, yeah, we work both. Sometimes we have some public project from the government. Sometimes we work for private owners. But during the recent 4 or 5 years, I think the whole condition, to my personal point of view, it's kind of improving, meaning that more and more clients, they want to find good architect to design good buildings for them. And it's not only about the idealism, it's also the quality of architecture has a tighter relation with their business success. I think that's a progress of the whole society because, like the building layering, or there's a lot of examples in the history, Western and Eastern. A great architecture is always it's a symbol of the social consciousness. So So in China, I think more and more we get into this kind of situation, which is good. But we do have a kind of unique system of this profession because we, at the same time, we have this independent architect. We are belonging to this group. But at the same time, we have a state-owned design institute, which they have easily over 500 people or 1,000 people. And at least for today, they have a big advantage of taking the opportunity of the public buildings in the more important urban location because they're belonging to the system and they have the license. But for us, we just have to, try to compete, but not as much yet. Yeah. So during the introduction, you said we normally repeat the smaller size or the mid size of the buildings of our design projects, but partially it's the selection of architects, but partially it's also because of the situation. Those big megastructure design opportunities won't come to us because of the entire setup of the profession. That's the condition in China. Do I answer your question? I think that.
So you wish to do a big project, or you like to do?
Well, I think we have to be very careful about the size or the scale of the building because sometimes it's just purely because of the driven by the commercial desire, not appropriate for the urban surrounding environment. But in some unique case, I'm okay with this megastructure. If you go around the world, this is a city, you can see ancient megastructure everywhere, and they can have a very good relationship with the rhythm of the urban space. So it really depends on the specific condition. But when we do big buildings, I think architect has to be very careful because it could be easily destroyed, the context. But it depends.
Hi. I'm very glad to meet you. And I would like to know a bit more about this debate you were talking about, because it's very interesting that you say that one should belong to an older generation, because I think it's only 10-15 years more than you. And what about the Champion Boy, the first architect I interviewed in China, even with a younger is still living?
Older generation.
Yeah. In Europe and in Italy, we have an idea of differences in generation, influences in generation, which is much more longer than last say. And of course, many of you, especially in education, travel, again, like the one of the anti-Chinese, but which is in the end the graph. Because, of course, your experience is the presence of American and Northern European architects there. Why do you say that one should more looking for philological probability of architecture looking to the traditional space, or do you think that this novelty is more phenomenologically based than ideologically based? I can understand that from the political history of William Noble one should, that of course it was looking for something more traditional. This is why also it was recognized when it got the physical prize. But what's new? I would like to know more, because I know quite well, especially the environment, and I've been studying more the urban issues, because architecture is something that in the last 20 years seems to be your own effect, a side effect to this. Can you tell me a bit more about this internal debate between Chinese and architects?
It's definitely an interesting question, but my answer is only my personal observation because, when you look into this contemporary history of Chinese architectural design, I think in the generation of Wang Shu, it's still the period of time that tried to set up or establish a certain kind of identity of the Chinese contemporary architecture. Because before Guangzhou, China probably still a closed country before the 1980s, and also because of the history of the contemporary China, this Cultural Revolution or something like that. So the country opened up in 1980s, late 1980s, and in 1990 and the early 2000 is the booming time of reconstruction. So China is so-called the biggest construction site. As you said, it's the experimental laboratory for the global architect. So I think in that period of time, it's important, not only for himself, for the group of Chinese architects to speak out in the global setting. You know what I mean? Because it's the first generation, the world started to look at China about what we were doing about the contemporary architecture. But more and more, I think, in the younger generation, it's becoming a less political or ideological person, and become more and more based on the personal interpretation about architecture. We don't have a common, or comparatively, now we don't have a common topic when we talk about architecture. Of course, how you reflect or engage with the history, with the tradition, is still a very important issue, but it might not be the major topic about the discourse about the Chinese architecture. So this is only, as you said, 10 years. The transition started showing the difference. But in China, because of the speed, we build a city in 6 years or 5 years, the new city is finished. There are a lot of new city or new town in China. It's built really within a very short period of time. So I guess this whole urbanization process really, make everything go faster than the European condition. But that's the reality.
I would say that maybe we stop here. If someone, se qualcuno vuole unirsi, prenderemo un aperitivo qua sotto in piazza con l'architetto. Ma no, vuole unirsi, diciamo, autofinanza. So thank you very much.